Today's the 4th day of the January 86 7-day retreat. We've talked quite a bit about the self on the previous days. Yet what comes up a lot in meetings and in sitting is relationship. So can we talk today about the self and its relationships? Actually, in fact, we've never been without relationship. We will examine it later in depth what we mean by relationship, or how it is that we are related. If we take an arbitrary starting point, there is the relationship between the sperm and the egg. And then the interrelationship of this little growing organism with the big organism in which it is growing. Which means that there is relationship between the whole mental, physical system of the mother with the growing fetus, baby. Her feelings and thoughts about it, which affect her organism and therefore affect this little organism within the large organism. And as the baby's born, there's the relationship or interrelationship between parents or parent and the child. One wonders how soon a newly born baby or child feels itself as a separate self. When that actually starts, and nobody knows. There are all kinds of speculations and theories about it, that at first there is cosmic oneness for the baby, which only later becomes cut up, divided. Actually, very, very early we don't remember these things. Of course, some people say they do remember. But one can easily imagine that when a baby is hungry and the breast is not there, there is also already some feeling of separation. And these early feelings precede thoughts about them. I think that has been established, although I'm not sure about that either. When thoughts first start and are feelings prior to thoughts, we assume they are. And there's no doubt that feelings also leave feeling memories. Memories are not only thought memories, they're also the memories of organismic feelings, affects, feelings of rage, of pleasure, of comfort, of joy, and the smile, the first smile. because it matters relatively little when the first feeling of me as a separate self starts. The fact is, it does start. In all human beings. And this is something we all share, and this we are all alike, no matter what the milieu is in which we grow up. Culturally, economically, nationally, historically. Every human being, or almost every human being, maybe a very, very few exceptions, feel themselves as a separate entity, a separate self. One may quickly learn to identify that self with a family or with a group, with a tribe, but then the tribe is the separate entity, separate vis-a-vis other tribes, or groups, or families. And the thought of that identity can be carried and transmitted, carried around and transmitted to the next generation. There's so much in our fundamental, basic behavior that we do share with animals from whom we, as it seems very likely, have evolved. All the evidence seems to point to that. Yet there is a difference, a very fundamental difference. When two animals fight with each other, and one sees more and more of these beautiful nature movies where the life of one animal through conception, birth, childhood, adolescence, and then growing to mate and giving birth to new babies is followed in a very natural environment, often by a photographer who will be out of sight so as not to influence or minimally influence the animals that are being photographed. So one sees two stags fighting over, either the fight among animals is over territory or over the females. Who will be the dominant one? Also over hierarchy, who will be the dominant one in the group? Who will have most of the females? And what territory will be defended against another group of animals? And the males usually have it out between each other, coming at each other, these round-horned sheep, the whole vast empty mountainside resonates with the clash of these horns. One can even hear this sometimes. To see these long-horned sheep is very difficult, but one can hear sometimes when one hikes along, hear these clashes. So one can see that in these movies, and then finally one of them has won. He stays around and the other one trots off. But one has the feeling, and I think can safely assume, that no thoughts are being carried about this. Grudges about this guy who now has it all and I am the loser. Even a cat fight or a dog fight. One animal then walks off, it gets the message. Who is which is the stronger one? But there are no thoughts being accumulated and nourished and nurtured about the other and oneself, and then passed on to the baby stags or the baby sheep. It always starts up freshly, not from the tradition, the thought tradition. But we have this ability, this is the new thing in the human brain, not only to record things that have happened. Animals may record certain things. They do. They definitely can learn. But we think about our accumulated thoughts. And this is how we can give birth to the thought of a self. Thinking about ourselves, how we were, the images that are deposited in the brain can be thought about, can be put side by side in a time sequence, and then thought about as, this is me through the time that I have developed. And what we touched upon yesterday, all the positive images, the negative images, what one is told one should be like, and what one is punished for, what one shouldn't be like. And this storage of images and thoughts and the feelings that go with it, and the energy that goes with it. A thought about oneself as being very successful, having just won in a competition, can give tremendous feelings of energy, and the thought of winning again, doing better this time, can arouse even more energy. And there is the thought, this is my energy. One can personalize through thinking everything about oneself as belonging to me. Where in truth we all started as egg and sperm getting together with nothing much more than genetic material. Which, to whom did that belong at the time? You could say the genetic material of the egg belongs to the egg, but this becomes pretty ridiculous. It is on a long succession of breeding, interbreeding, that has resulted in this egg and this sperm, which now form a union, a combination. And due to that combination of this genetic set with that genetic set, there is something unique as far as the inheritance. I don't have all the technical terms. As far as the inherited material is concerned, so I've read there are no two quite alike individual organisms. The odds are totally out of the question that two would be completely alike. But that is true for every such combination of egg and sperm. We share that uniqueness of genetic material. And yet the general functioning of the growing fetus is very much alike, whether one is born in Africa or in Siberia. It's the same functioning of development, same growth, and I don't know any of the details, but the way the brain has developed and is developing in the growing organism is the same. And it's, except for the genetic difference, the brain as a functional, it's not an organ, whatever you call it, is the same for all human beings. Its genetic content may be different, meaning the talents, how one develops to look, to how tall one grows. But the fact that it is conditionable, that it can think about itself, is not unique to one individual. It's unique to all human beings as compared to animals. Out of this unique ability of the brain to think about itself as being a self, not the brain, but the whole organism, the whole being. Out of that grows this sense of separation, of being someone different. Different we are. I don't want to confuse the words, but being separate. Let's stay with the word separate. A separate entity. With my own energies, my own will. Will is energy to accomplish something that is desired, that has been thought about, or one is asked to do it, and then arousing the energies to achieve that. One calls that one's personal will, and then also one's personal achievement. Why? Why this identification with this body, this process of identification? Just because it happens? That this possibility is given in the brain to not only thoughts occurring, energy welling up, desiring something, running away from something, which is all has been there before human beings. It happens in animals. But why say, this is me, this is my desire, my energy, my body, my brain, my goals, and my fear? It's all right to use the I in communication. As a matter of fact, it facilitates communication so one doesn't mix up who's talking about whom. But is there any awareness that this I is just a convenience of communication? Or is it a solidly felt fact, or appearingly a fact, that there is such a separate entity here, aside from there being a separate body? The functioning of the body is very much alike in all of us. Somebody may be handicapped, somebody may be more agile or whatever. But basically the functioning of the human body is the same, the world over. And just because there are now billions of people doesn't mean that there have always been billions of separate people. Probably started with very few groups, very few units. So the inherited material that we have, we also share to a large extent. The training that we got, we share with all the people who have been trained in our society. Maybe very different from the training someone receives in Russia, South Africa, or East Africa. But it's training, and we are trainable and conditionable all over, including this conditioning of feeling oneself as a separate self, due to being able to carry around memories of ourselves and the feelings that are associated with these memories, being able to project those memories as our future life. I don't know if any animal thinks of his future life. It's not given in the structure of the brain, in the functioning of the brain, but we can do it. We can see ourselves in the future and make plans for the future. imagine ourselves being happier than we're now, wanting ourselves to be more important, more whatever. And in this ability to imagine ourselves in the past, how we were through the images that we have stored and are constantly storing in the brain, imagining ourselves now as we're sitting here and what we will accomplish or be or do in the future. In this process, we are actually isolating ourselves from one another. Because we're convinced that my life is different and separate from yours. The very process of thinking in those terms, of thinking in terms of past memories, projecting these memories into the future, that itself is an isolation process. It is cut off from the wholeness of life. Which actually has no future. It just moves and develops and changes and modifies. There are mutations. But it just all happens as a total, undivided movement where every part and particle is interrelated with every other part and particle as an integral whole in motion. From that, we're cut off when we think about ourselves as what I was, what I am, what I will be. Which is one aspect of our living, this living in this thought-created shell of me and mine as separate from you and yours. And the other aspect of it is the pain of that separation. The pain of that feeling of isolation, in addition to the pleasures that it brings to imagine oneself as better than others or accomplishing something, moving ahead, progressing. The pleasure that brings, there is the pain of isolation from others, because that brings isolation from others. Does one see that? That if we dwell in our thoughts as we do most of the time, we live in a thought bubble. Billions of thought bubbles. Feeling separate from each other and feeling the pain of that separation, the longing for relationship. Maybe not relationship with a whole, that may elude one totally, but relationship with another bubble, with another individual, or with a group, to form sort of a super bubble in which one shares common beliefs, common behaviors, which somewhat ameliorates the pain of aloneness or loneliness. But it cannot wipe it out because it is created by living in thought of a self. and in the actions that this thought of self produces, in the self-centered actions which are divisive, always divisive. As soon as one tries to further one's own ends, one steps on somebody else furthering his or her own ends. Sometimes one can get together and combine one's ends, and so one will temporarily move in harmony together because one's ends are the same, so one's actions are somewhat correlated, not antagonistic. But that is not what one really desires of relationship. What is it that one desires of relationship? Many things, actually. There's no end of the list. That what we want out of relationship with another. We want to feel less lonely. Maybe one doesn't think in terms of less lonely. One wants to be rid of loneliness and hopes that by being with another, that will be solved. The loneliness will go away. But there are other reasons why we desire relationship. Because getting together, two people can do more together than living alone. And a man and a woman can form a family, have children. One may want children for whatever reason. One has to look at that. Really, sometime, if one wants children, to honestly look why one wants children. To just put it all out on the table like a deck of cards where every card is put face up and sees the whole deck. Nothing is hidden. One may want two combined incomes. One can buy more together if two incomes combine. Also, going back for a moment, all of us, the world over, have lived a long period of helplessness as babies and little children, even as growing children. We are quite helpless, or totally helpless, to take care of ourselves. And we need a mother, at least one parent, a mother or a father, to take care of us. No baby could survive without one parenting person, at least one parenting person. And in this state of total helplessness, one has to take everything that comes. Kind treatment or unkind treatment. Being bossed and bullied or being treated fairly. I think most of us, if not all of us, received a lot of bullying as little children. Being the objects of the elders' power trips, because the elders too once were children, victims of their elders' power trips. And we've talked about this many times, maybe not in this particular retreat, what one has suffered and what has not set well with one, what has gone against one's feelings, is stored up in, as it were, a reservoir, which also wants its revenge, it wants its release to pay back what one has received. Sometimes when I say these things, particularly this, someone will say you paint everything disgustingly negative about human beings. We're also loving beings, and so on and so on. But this is not done to be negative, to put human beings down, but to illuminate what happens, because there cannot be any release from any of these patterns which have gone on for as many generations as we've lived, if they are not seen and understood. That is the only release. There's no training that will release. Training only superimposes a new pattern upon an old pattern. That's why we talk about these things, so that we can all watch this in ourselves, not just listen to it here and then forget all about it, but watch it in our daily life, so that maybe there can be release from these habitual patterns of retaliation, paying back, being hurt, storing it up, carrying it around, which are endless. They're endlessly repeating themselves from generation to generation. So coming back to why do we want or need relationship? Is it that one can also act out some of these unfinished businesses? I don't know whether this is conscious in the human mind. It probably isn't. But it does happen once the relationship is established. These endless power struggles between him and her, or him and him, if the relationship is between man and man, which is just the replay of the child's suffering of domination and not being able to pay it back, although children have also their ways of paying it back, have their ways of getting back at the parent. But it's endless. It's not resolved if it isn't seen and the trace is wiped out in that insight. So being with, as adults now, as so-called adults, we living together, we still get satisfaction in these who wins over whom, or sticking to one's position and being able to do it without parental punishment. It can be so subtle if one doesn't look at and peel it off and look at it. Feeling dominated, or feeling the other one is always dominating, and the other one is also feeling that his or her partner is always dominating, getting his or her way. Which means, in getting together in relationship, one carries all of one's old images right into the relationship. The images about oneself, which date back to the earliest of days, and the images that one has formed of the ideal partner with whom one would like to live. But what is actually getting together is two human beings, which are not images. They have their separate needs and wants and desires and fears and ways of behaving. So how does one live together? How does one see each other? And if there's friction, what is the cause of the friction, of the difficulty? One person told me that in sitting, anger comes up about what one's mate will do in the future. The person hasn't done it yet, but one already imagines it. And it is not what one would like this person to do, and one gets angry. Which means one has an image of one's mate, how he should be, but also has an image of how he's always been, or she has always been. And how naturally he or she will also behave in the future, because this is how he or she has always been. And that is not what I would like him or her to be like, so I get angry. Angry at being the victim of this behavior, which hasn't even taken place yet. May have taken place in the past. So can we see and look what we do to each other through this attachment of images of ourselves and the other? If I come home and my husband has an idea about what I'm about to do, I can sense that already. I'm just using this as an example. I can sense that he has an image of what I'm about to do. I may not have been about to do that, but I can sense this. And I don't want him to tell me how to be. Or how I am. So I may precisely act the way he dreads that I may act, just because I don't want him to change me. By having these images, we keep each other on the same track. Don't give each other a chance to maybe change. Non-violently. Non-violently meaning not feeling that the other wants me to change. Since childhood, we've reacted against this, being told, be like this, don't be like that. And it's still going on in our married or family life. And we're telling it to our children. And with that, hardening these image shells, hardening these behavior patterns. Because if I feel that somebody wants me to act otherwise, there's so habitually a resistance coming up to that. Is it even possible to see the person one lives with without an image? Is that possible? Not only to see the person with whom one lives without an image, but with no tendency to want to change him or her. The image may come up and the tendency to change may come up, but if it is seen, can that abate? That means there can be no image of oneself either, of how one wants to be treated by the other. Or how one wants to be seen by the other. No image. Just this moment-to-moment living together and exploring together who one actually is. Actually. I think only in a state like that, where one sees image and puts it aside, is not caught up in it, has the image of the other, puts it aside as a blurring factor, a blurring veil, and is intensely interested of what this person is really like, what oneself is like without image, what the relationship is like if there's no protection through images. Then there can be something like a relationship. Because it's no longer two capsules colliding or attracting each other. Which never works and never lasts. It may last, but it's not a relationship. This is asking a great deal because we're still children. We still want attention. Want to be fussed over. Told how pretty we are, or this or that. Praised. And seeking that, and yet even if it comes, then it's not satisfying. Because it comes out of a totally artificial structure, the self, which in its very existence is a capsule, a separate thing, in thought, in feeling. Unless that breaks open, it will continue with its demands and needs, and they're not fulfillable. Never fulfillable. It can create dependence on others who will constantly pour in what is needed, but it's never fulfilled because it's still a capsule, cut off from the whole. A capsule existence cannot be a joyous existence. It's impossible. It can only have momentary, temporary, transient pleasures. And with that immediately the fears that these pleasures won't reoccur. Or if they end, then the desolation. So even if one has found another capsule on which one thinks one can depend, it does not bring wholeness. Wholeness can only be when there's no capsule. And when there's no capsule, then for the first time there's relationship. And relationship here we mean love, which is bare of any of our ingrained and trained and learned sentimentality, our romantic ideas about love, which are of the capsule and its ideas and fantasies. Love, real love is what comes out of life itself, out of living in touch with everything and everybody. And this everybody then is not my limited environment in which I grew up, my family, or group, or country. It has no such borders. It includes the whole human family. Because one is no other than everyone else. One isn't. When that is seen, then there's love. And when the incredible suffering and sorrow which has resulted over the whole duration of human existence on this planet, from our self-isolation, which inevitably creates antagonism with what is not the self, with the other. When this suffering can be looked at, not looked away from, but can be looked at, felt, seen, not as inevitable, but how it comes to be. And one can see that in oneself. How suffering and sorrow comes out of this capsule. And antagonism, greed, anger at others. When this is all observed minutely, carefully, impartially, from moment to moment in this life, then seeing this vast sorrow that engulfs human beings the world over, that gives birth to compassion. Genuine compassion, not I must be a compassionate person. One understands how one can get so totally trapped in this. And the agony that comes out of this trap and out of feeling there's no way out except all these substitute measures. Which don't tackle the capsule. And one sees everybody doing the same thing. And sharing the same frustrations and the same sorrow. When that's seen not in this small, minute sphere of self-pity, but human sorrow, human suffering. From which one does not feel separate, then there is really compassion, a feeling. I don't know what it's a feeling. I don't know if one even would speak of relationship, because when there is no me, then everything is related. interrelated. It's not, I'm related to everything. One is part of the whole. One is all of that. Isn't one? The moment the thought of me springs up, immediately there's a fracture. Me, and across the precipice or the abyss there's you, or them, the others. And the moment this process is seen as it happens, can that seeing be whole, free from fracture? Even if one doesn't know what the outcome will be for me, it's the same outcome for everyone. So if one finds oneself in relationship, as we do most of the time, unless we make a point of isolating ourselves physically, living with a group or living with another person, can one discover each other as human beings in this relationship, oneself and each other. It's much easier to discover oneself in relationship when one is by oneself and no one challenges one, reminds one of this or that, then a lot of stuff remains dormant without being seen. But living together, can one put aside all idealism? Or see what it does. How is it blind? It's like blinders. Idealisms and images are blinders. If one sees that, one takes them off and looks again, listens again. What was hurtful at the moment, can one listen again? What was it that hurt? What did he or she really say? Did I see him who said that, or her as she said that? Or was the hurt so strong that I immediately projected an image on the other person? And isn't it always the image in oneself that hurts and smarts and blinds and projects? Feels sorry for itself, wants others to feel sorry for it. What a nuisance we carry around. We will end here for today.